Star Wars is about a lot of things. At its heart, one of the things that makes up the heart of Star Wars is family. It's within the story. It's embedded in the story, across the Skywalker saga. And to a certain extent in the spin-off films as well, when you look at Solo and Rogue One, not just direct blood relation family, but the family that we pick up through life, through our friends or extended family. But it goes beyond that, right? It goes beyond the family within the films. It's more of a reflection, and I think this really accounts for the popularity of Star Wars. It's a reflection of us and how important family is to us and the way that Star Wars brings us together as a family, and it also divides us like families are divided. That being said, I am so glad that The Rise of Skywalker is a film that has brought all of the fandom together. A film that is universally praised by every single corner of the Star Wars fandom. That in this singular Episode 9, Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, wounds have now been healed as we all come together. That didn't happen at all, did it? Not even close. Holy cow. All right, so on the show this week, I want to address a couple of things. And for those that are more of the casual Star Wars fan, or maybe this is the only podcast you listen to, or you don't spend time on Twitter, I'll provide a bit of background on this, because oftentimes when you're a part of a community, the issue seems much bigger than it actually is when it comes to frustration, anxiety, or anger within the fandom, which is certainly happening right now with a segment of the fandom in the reaction to specifically Ben's death, and now suddenly people are, in my opinion, using Ben's death to overly critique the film and also complain about the lack of Rose Tico in the movie. So I'm going to get into all that and provide a little bit of perspective. Not going to spend a ton of time on it, but I need to address it because I'm a part of that fandom. I mean, I watch that happening within the fandom. So I want to share, as I often do on the show, sort of my feelings about that. And look, that being said, I've treated this show as an extension of my fandom ever since I started it. And so I like to talk about things that are affecting me and my fandom, even though you may not be seeing it or hearing it. I applaud you. Don't go looking for it because it sucks. My wife will be joining me for a portion of the podcast this week in a pre-recorded interview that I did with her. And the reason why I'm bringing her on is because she's a really good gauge of the casual Star Wars fan. Somebody who loves the movies, but doesn't really read a lot of the ancillary stuff, doesn't rewatch them a ton with me. She loves The Rise of Skywalker. And it's really fascinating because in the middle of this divide in the fandom over decisions that were made in the movie, and if you're not aware of this, again, I'll explain, this movie has actually changed my wife's view on a number of different things for the positive. The Rise of Skywalker is her favorite sequel trilogy Star Wars film, and she was not an Adam Driver fan going into The Rise of Skywalker. As a matter of fact, she didn't really care for him as an actor, and now she loves him as an actor, to the point where she actually requested to watch The Force Awakens on Friday night because of her, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say inspiration, but because of how much she enjoyed The Rise of Skywalker, she wants to consume more Star Wars. She's acting like me now. And this goes back to my family comment of bringing families together. Our love of Star Wars was something that my wife and I always shared, but obviously I'm a different level, and it was a sort of a Christmas miracle. It was a gift. It was cool. This is what's great about Star Wars, that my wife is sharing my fandom with me now in this movie that we both absolutely love. And her take on some of the decisions that were made in the film, especially as a woman, are really, really interesting and, in my opinion, very relevant as well. Because right now there is division in the fandom. And I want to address a part of that as we move forward in the show this week. So here's what's going on right now. For those that aren't aware, within different facets of pop culture or just life in general. And I'm just going to give a couple of examples here because you guys know what I'm talking about. So, like within radio, I have a Star Wars community. I mean, a radio community that I belong to. Not just my relationship with the audience on Twin Cities News Talk, KTLK here in Minneapolis, the Justice and Drew show, but within sort of in the background, within the radio community of people that I know within the community and websites that are specifically for radio professionals. Okay. I am attempting to broaden my involvement in the self-publishing community for the books that I write because I want to learn more and I want to find out more of the facets and how I can capitalize on potentially being a successful author in the future. I mean, I've had some success so far, but I've only got 2 books, and the 3rd book is on the way, but I'm a part of that community. And then you get to this show and Star Wars. I'm also a part of the Star Wars fandom community, following pages on Reddit. I've made friends, specifically Zach over at Knights of Vader. I've made friends through my involvement in the Star Wars community, my involvement on Twitter, other podcasts that I've been on, and friends that I've made with individuals from Girls with Sabers, for example, right, within the Star Wars community. Now, within that Star Wars community, there's division, once again, for those that are not aware. I'll be upfront. I find it really interesting that in the wake of The Last Jedi, you had a portion of the Star Wars fandom that hated decisions that were made about Luke Skywalker, hated the fact that Luke was isolated on that island and had given up in not just his connection with the Force, but in being a Jedi. I agree with some people. I think it was Zach on the Knights of Vader podcast that said he's convinced that a lot of individuals that don't like The Last Jedi never finished it because Luke does that full arc in the film and becomes the most powerful Jedi ever, essentially, at the end of The Last Jedi. Okay. But with that film, you had a portion of the fandom incredibly frustrated with the way Luke was handled, right on down to his death, and Rian Johnson ruined the franchise, and they were finished with it, and videos have been made, and millions of dollars have been made from YouTube videos, if you combine them all together, from people just complaining about The Last Jedi for the past couple of years. A part of those complaints also was aimed at the Reylo community. Individuals who wanted to see Kylo Ren be redeemed, wanted to see Ben Solo and Rey come together as one, didn't like the decisions that were made with finger-touching Lovin, for example, in The Last Jedi, and there was a lot of criticism and shade thrown at the Reylo portion of the fandom community, who sat back and defended The Last Jedi and the decisions that Rian Johnson made, and criticized and complained about those that were pushing back on something that they loved. And now, with The Rise of Skywalker, and this is not everybody, so please listen to what I'm saying. And again, you may not be aware of this because you're not in this community. But when it comes to The Rise of Skywalker now, and again, if this is not you, I'm not talking to you, but there is a portion of the Star Wars community fandom, specifically Reylos, of which I classified myself as one, that have now become the very thing that they were fighting against in the wake of the negative criticism from The Last Jedi. They're ticked off that Ben Solo died. They are critiquing the film because of that particular choice on a number of different levels, the same way that the fandom menace did in the wake of The Last Jedi, and they're pushing back on individuals who think that the decision to kill off Ben Solo, and did I mention there's going to be spoilers here? Yeah, I put it in the title. The decision to kill off Ben Solo was the wrong decision to make, and it was personally offensive to them. If you want some examples, wait until I get into some of the listener feedback this week, and everybody's entitled to their opinion, don't misunderstand, but there is a portion of the fandom now that is doing the very thing that they were pushing back and complaining about when it came to individuals who didn't like the decisions made in The Last Jedi. And it's just so unfortunate. You are entitled to your opinion, and I would never take that away from anybody. But be that as it may, it is a bummer. It is just a bummer that this movie had such a negative effect on so many people. And unfortunately, that negative effect has been perpetuated in a lot of ways by other individuals looking to capitalize on it, exactly the same way that it happened with The Last Jedi. And that's just really, really unfortunate. I've actually had to sort of step back from the community and being on Twitter just because I don't want to see all the negativity. I love this movie. And I will be spending weeks to come talking about this film and different aspects of this film that I love. I've seen it 4 times now. I'm going to my 5th showing coming up on Friday. I'm recording this on Thursday. It'll be released over the weekend. So by the time this comes out, I will have seen it 5 times. Not only just me, but my wife will as well, and she's never been to go see a Star Wars film this many times. And she loves what was done in this movie. But I've got people that are telling me they'll no longer listen to this podcast now because of my particular view and opinion over The Rise of Skywalker. And look, man, to each their own, that's fine. I don't listen to podcasts that I don't like. I've pitched off of podcasts myself because of comments that were made that I simply don't want to hear. So that is, that is obviously completely your right, and I hope you'll come back and visit the show. I just wish that the fandom community, a portion of the fandom community, didn't take these movies so seriously. And I know that sounds really bizarre coming from an individual who's done hundreds of these podcasts right now, who's major pop culture influence. The biggest pop culture influence in my life is Star Wars. I'm sitting back here as a mega fan saying we shouldn't take these films so seriously. And hopefully with what I'm going to provide here in a moment, I can help a little bit in that. Maybe if you're maybe you're looking for a way to like this movie or a way to understand the decisions that were made in this and provide a little bit of perspective. So maybe it'll help. Not my goal. My goal is just to share my thoughts, not just on the fandom, but of the film itself. And I've done that from the get-go when it comes to this particular show. It's my thoughts. It's an extension of my fandom. And I absolutely understand how subjective art can be. But I'm a person that really likes, I won't say love, but I love all Star Wars. I love all the films. I love some more than others. Really enjoyed The Force Awakens. I still think The Last Jedi is a masterpiece. And I thought The Rise of Skywalker after 4 viewings was an amazing end to not just the sequel trilogy, but to all 9 films of the Skywalker saga as a whole. And I completely understand and agree with the decisions that were made in the film across the board. All right, so let's get into a bit of that. And let's start off here. This is J.J. Abrams. The audio's a little wonky. This was after the release of The Rise of Skywalker. He was sitting down with Vanity Fair's Anthony Breznican, and him and Chris Terrio were being very open and honest about the movie, the fandom, and obviously now with the film being out, they can talk spoilers a little bit more specifically than they were prior. But I really appreciated what J.J. Abrams had to say in this interview with Anthony Breznican. Here is the audio.
A vast audience for this. How do you deal with people, or how does it make you feel, or what would you say to people who don't like what happens, or wish it was something different? Is there a problem with the fandom that?
No, I'd say that they're right. The people who love it more than anything are also right. We knew going in. I was asked just I think 7 hours ago in another countries. Someone said, "So how did you go about pleasing everyone?" And I was like, what? Like, not to say that should be what anyone tries to do anyway, but how would one even go about it? Especially with Star Wars. I don't need to tell anyone here, we live in a moment where everything immediately seems to default to outrage. And there is a kind of an MO of just of it's either exactly as I see it or you're my enemy. And it's a bit like magicians. You'd think magicians would all just get along. Magicians hate each other. Now, I'm sure there are exceptions, and I'm sure someone will write to me like, "That's not fair, and I hate you." And they'll be right.
Unshaded magicians. I can't believe.
No, but it's like it's a crazy thing that there is such a sort of a norm that seems to be devoid of nuance and compassion. This is not about Star Wars. It's about everything. Compassion and acceptance and allowing people to. It's a crazy moment. So we knew starting this, any decision we made, a design decision, a musical decision, a narrative decision, would please someone and infuriate someone else. And they're all right. And Chris wants to say something.
Well, no, and then your only compass, really, your only North Star is your heart and how you feel about this. I mean, we went into this movie knowing it was a love letter to Star Wars. It was a love letter to the old school kind of filmmaking that inspired George, Republic serials, Flash Gordon, samurai movies, all these other genre references that we love, and it's the stuff about Hollywood movie making that we love. It's the big mythic stuff that we love. And so we went into it sort of deciding that is what we wanted the final episode to be. If you're
I didn't expect that J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio were going to be able to, or were going to create a film that would ultimately touch me in the same way that Rian Johnson's did. I love what they did with this movie. I love what they've done with this sequel trilogy. There is so much depth and emotion and mythology and interpersonal complicated relationships being worked through in these films. I actually think that Disney was safe, and I really appreciate the fact that they did this, whether it was by design or whether it just happened this way. But, The Force Awakens was safe. That was a safe movie. We're going to lean heavily on nostalgia. We're going to provide a story that has a lot of similarities to that which came before it, to the point where it frustrated George Lucas because he didn't feel like it really took any risks and was a rehash of what he's seen before, especially from a design standpoint. And I understand that, and I can see that. But I didn't care. I love X-Wings and TIE Fighters, and the little changes that they did were enough to satisfy this fan. But then you get into The Last Jedi, which was bold and subverted expectations and divided a portion of the fandom. Not everybody, but a portion of the fandom. And again, you got to keep, in my opinion, do yourself a favor and keep this in the back of your mind. Regardless of where you land on your views of the sequel trilogy film, whether you hate them or love them, remember that, especially if you hate them and you watch the videos and you see stuff on Twitter, that is a minority of the people that are going out to see these films. The box office numbers do, I don't like to follow it, but I do ultimately tell the tale of the success of these films. And certainly, The Last Jedi was successful, and despite what appeared to be a slow start for The Rise of Skywalker, if you've seen any of the box office headlines for the rest of the week, it's actually picking up speed. The Rise of Skywalker is. Over the course of the holidays, it's up there with The Force Awakens in terms of lower drop-off from opening weekend and the money that it's making over the Christmas holiday. This movie is going to have legs, and that's what most of the box office analysts are saying. So I really feel like Disney did something very bold in not only hiring Rian Johnson and allowing him to tell the story that he did. J.J. Abrams did something bold in bringing somebody in like Chris Terrio to really get into some more of the mythology and to bring that into The Rise of Skywalker. There is way more depth in this film than I ever imagined there would be, and so much to unpack in the years to come as we wait for the next big screen film in 2022. It's one of the things that I really have begun to love about The Rise of Skywalker is there really is a lot of different things that a lot of threads we can pull on. And even the things that have been left somewhat ambiguous about the bolder and the bigger decisions of, well, how really did Palpatine last all this time beyond, the dark side is a pathway to many abilities that some would consider to be unnatural, or him creating Snoke. Enough was given for me in the film to satisfy me in watching that movie without sitting back going, well, how did that happen? I look at these movies, as I've said often, as historical documents. And on top of that, I also look at these from the perspective of those that are involved in the actual story and the characters, we're given just as much information as the characters are, and often in like you're not provided every single answer on a whim, and I'm totally fine with that. But more to my point, what they did with Rey and Kylo Ren and Ben Solo was bold. In the prequel trilogy, you had the fall of Anakin Skywalker, and he fell for a number of different reasons, but in large part due to his concern over losing the one that he loved so deeply in Padme. In the original trilogy, you have the rise of Luke Skywalker and the redemption of Darth Vader, closing out the arc of Anakin Skywalker from the prequel trilogy. And what does the sequel trilogy do, in my opinion? You get the rise of Rey while getting the redemption of Ben Solo with the added element of this incredibly intimate and personal relationship between these two dual protagonists of Rey and Ben Solo. And I love that. Going back and watching The Force Awakens, I can now, whether or not it was by design or not, I don't care. I don't care if they didn't have this planned out. I don't care if they came to the conclusion that Rey and Ben were going to kiss at the end of The Rise of Skywalker in the middle of writing The Rise of Skywalker. It doesn't matter. That's the story that was told. So now when I go back and watch The Force Awakens like I did last night, I see into Kylo Ren in those moments, when he first meets her, when he takes off the mask, when he gets intimate by probing into her mind, when he decides not to kill her at the end, and actually in that moment asks her to join him. He asks her to join him in every single film of the sequel trilogy. And he finally figures out how to have that happen by turning to the light side and being redeemed. But unfortunately for him, and this is the decision that I agree with, he had to sacrifice something, and that was himself to the Force in that moment when he finally came to that realization, because we still have to be accountable for our sins of the past. And again, Star Wars is different from the real world. I understand that, and I will continue to preach that particular point. But for Ben Solo, I don't see it going any other way. Now, before I get into those particular choices and then we get into listener feedback, because I don't want to wipe out too much on my own commentary, because I got a lot of comments from you that I want to get into, let me go back to what J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio were saying. He is 100% correct. There was no way this movie was going to ever appeal to every single fan. That is just a Herculean task that it's impossible with a movie like this. The odds are against them making a film that's going to go and please everybody. And as a matter of fact, I actually think the way that they decided to end the film was pretty spot on in covering all the bases and making it completely rounded. Because to go any other way, it falls apart. And again, I'll get into this in just a second. And I applaud J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio, and I hope that they're actually being honest about that, about what they're saying. And what I mean by that is, as somebody who creates content for a living, whether it's live Monday through Friday on the radio show that I host here in Minneapolis, whether it's with the stories that I write, I had a talent coach, Bill McMahon, I've mentioned him before, who taught me early on in my radio career that, if you want to be as successful as you can be, you need to be as authentic and as genuine and genuine as you possibly can, and you will reach the biggest audience that you are capable of reaching. If you create content or talk about stories that you don't really care about, you're not going to be into it. You're not going to be the best version of the content that you're creating. The way to create the best content you're capable of creating is to create and talk about things that you love and be genuine and authentic. And don't create or talk about things you don't love. And that's why I appreciate Chris Terrio's comments in there when he says our only North Star was what felt right, what was coming from the heart. These two individuals were in charge with crafting this story a very difficult task, and they did what they felt was best. And they put it out in public and let the audience to decide how, whether or not they like it or not. And ultimately, I think the box office is reflecting that for the most part, people enjoyed it. Unfortunately, a lot of people didn't. And now we have this bizarro world where those individuals that were getting the most pushback in the wake of The Last Jedi have now become a group of individuals pushing back on individuals the way that they were pushed back over haters of The Last Jedi. And it's just so weird and bizarre, and I don't understand it, but that it is what it is. And again, everybody's entitled to their opinion. Don't misunderstand. Doesn't mean that I have to agree with it. Okay. So, to the decisions that The Rise of Skywalker made, and then we are going to get into your listener feedback this week. Unless you drastically overhaul the story, right? Which is, again, I don't even like suggesting that. Let's just deal with the story that we're being told. Because to have a different ending, you would have to go and tell a completely different story. And if that's what you think they should have done, then that's fine. But they didn't. This was the story they decided to tell in The Rise of Skywalker. Over the course of several viewings now, I no longer have any issues with the pacing anymore. I actually appreciate the pacing. I like how rapid the first part of the film actually is, and how it does slow down when we kind of get into the meat of the movie. And the beginning part of it was necessary to sort of lay the groundwork. And on first viewing, it was a bit jarring, but it's also jarring because I'm watching it as a mega Star Wars fan, and I'm nervous, and I'm taking in every little bit. And you want to just linger at certain scenes and watch things play out. It's a part of what makes Star Wars so great. It's not just watching a drama set in the real world where you're just focused on characters talking. And if you had, it's much different. You want to be able to take it all in and watch every frame and see all the detail. And so when a Star Wars movie on a first viewing is edited rapidly, it's a little bit jarring because you're like, oh, wait, I want to see more of that. I want to see more of Ben Solo or Kylo Ren on Mustafar at the beginning of the film. And, I didn't realize that was Vader's castle he was in front of, and that the Wayfinder there on Mustafar was actually a part of the remnants of what was Vader's castle. I found that out in the visual dictionary. And, oh, man, I really like that ice glacier planet out in space. And then that scene with Poe and Claude and Finn was fantastic. You see where I'm going here. But upon further viewings, I appreciate that pacing much more, and it doesn't bother me at all anymore. I like the elements of sort of the adventure, like Indiana Jones, and the nod to the Goonies, and these characters going together on this. All of the action set pieces are fantastic. There's no point. Somebody had asked me, hadn't seen the film yet, a friend of mine, Ken, that said, hey, we're going to see it for the first time, and my kids want to know when's the best place to go to the bathroom. And I'm like, I don't know, because even the scenes that slow down, something significant happens within a few minutes. Maybe during the tread speeder chase on Pisana, if you go quickly, you could probably, if you want to miss the action sequence and not miss anything of relevance. All right. So getting to the end of the film, and there'll be plenty of shows in the future to go and to break the movie down even more. But getting to the end of the film and the decisions that were made in the movie that people are most upset about. Let me start off with the smaller one, and this one's just kind of erupted over the course of the past few days, where people have clocked Rose Tico's film time of Kelly Marie Tran like 1 minute and 16 seconds on screen, and they're complaining about it. Okay, that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion, don't misunderstand. But at the same time, she's not crucial to the story. She's not. She was important to The Last Jedi. I love Rose Tico in The Last Jedi. But there is no checklist that says every single character in these movies is allotted a certain amount of screen time for relevancy. There just isn't. This particular story didn't lend itself to the addition of multiple scenes by Rose Tico. And quite honestly, I'm okay with that. Hanging out with her more, would have been unnecessary. Or putting her with the core group of characters would have been unnecessary. I'm fine with it. Okay, so that's side note. Let's get to the big one. Ben Solo had to die. He had to die. Well, why? Well, I'll tell you why. This is, in my opinion, why Ben Solo had to die. Spoiler alert. First off, and I mentioned this in the spoiler reaction podcast, but I'll bring it up again. I think there was a story element involving Carrie Fisher's passing away and Ben Solo that sort of brought about some of these decisions being made. But I also thought they were the right decisions. I liked how they handled Carrie Fisher. It does take me out of the movie a little bit, in as much as Tarkin does in Rogue One, not enough to ruin anything for me, but just because I know the backstory and I watch so many of the documentaries, I can tell where those scenes and the footage was pulled from that they used for Carrie Fisher. But I thought that her connection with Ben Solo, especially in the moment in the Death Star fight when Rey stabs him with his own saber after his attention is drawn because his mom is reaching out to him, was incredibly beautiful, relevant, and poignant. Especially when combined with The Last Jedi and the moment that they share when Kylo Ren is going after her ship before she's blown out into space, when he decides he's not going to fire on her and the TIE fighters fire on her anyways. That connection there is a nice addition to what we got first off in The Last Jedi. And of course, leaning into the moment when Han Solo reappears as a part of Ben's memory, and that amazing exchange, which really changes the dynamic of watching the moment when Ben kills Han Solo in The Force Awakens now. Both those scenes complement each other and are equally beautiful now for different reasons and in different ways than they were before. Certainly that scene in The Force Awakens now, knowing how, because of Han's death in that moment, that's part of what brings Ben Solo back and destroys Kylo Ren. But you can't hide the fact that he killed his father. That was his choice. I made a mistake on the last episode where I said that Kylo Ren was responsible for billions of deaths. I was referring to the destruction of the Hosnian system. Sure, he didn't give the command. Snoke did. I will say this, though. Kylo Ren still had a decision to make. Ben Solo still had a decision to make. It wasn't like he moved to stop Snoke from using Starkiller to destroy the New Republic. He stood there with his helmet on, the realizer looking out the window as the Starkiller base fired on the Hosnian on the Hosnian system. It wasn't like he walked away. No, he's complicit in those deaths. He didn't pull the trigger, and I know that he was influenced, but be that as it may, we know he can walk away because he does walk away. Okay, so there is a level of responsibility there. He murders Lor San Tekka in cold blood. We know that he's got his kitty litter box filled with ashes of his victims. And who knows who the people were at the beginning of the Rise of Skywalker that he was mercilessly wiping out on Mustafar before getting to the Wayfinder, right? It's awesome that Ben Solo was redeemed, and they handled it in a beautiful way. And the moment when Ben Solo returned and every single bit that we got with Adam Driver as Ben Solo was fantastic. It was great. And it makes me want more Ben Solo. But I'm okay that we're not getting more Ben Solo because of what the story does and how he is redeemed and the way that it plays out. And in my opinion, understanding that you have to be held accountable for your actions, even within the Star Wars universe. Okay, so again, to the point of why he had to die, why couldn't he live? Because if he lived, then why would any Jedi die? All right, so let me back up a little bit here. Somebody made a great point that the reason why Palpatine didn't jump into Rey after Ben had got thrown into the pit before he returns, right? When Rey has both sabers and she pushes back, uses the Force lightning against Palpatine and destroys him. Why didn't he jump into her body? Somebody made a really good point that he didn't jump into her body because she wasn't killing him out of anger. She was using his anger against him. I like that. I think that works. I also think a part of the reason why Palpatine wasn't able to jump into Rey is because Rey died. She was exhausted in that moment. It was only her life force had been drained. And this is key. This was a setup throughout the whole movie and even in The Mandalorian. I don't think that episode 7 of The Mandalorian and seeing the child heal the arm, right, of the lead guy of the guild, and I forgot his name right now. I don't think that was necessarily a direct tie-in. However, it is very relevant because every time we've seen the child use the Force to do any type of healing or anything major, it drained him. Rey, when she healed the snake on Pisana, was holding her hand. It drained her. I'm actually kind of thinking that during the Death Star fight, at the end of that fight, that when Rey is almost to the point where Kylo's going to defeat her, she's clutching her hand again, and I wondered if that was because of the lightsaber or if it was actually because she was still dealing with the ramifications of draining some of her Force to go and heal the snake. Okay, so Rey died because she was drained. She was only able to defeat Palpatine because of the Jedis that came before her. She was all the Jedi. And that was all the Jedi versus what Palpatine was saying, that he was all the Sith, right? And so she dies. Kylo Ren comes up, redeemed, as Ben Solo. And what does he do? He makes a decision to heal Rey with the remaining life force that he has and is able to transcend and transform into the Force because of the help of his mother. He had to die in that moment, or else it didn't make any sense. For him to heal her and then live, it kind of throws that whole dynamic of what the Force can do and paying a price for that. You can't give a life without taking a life, and you know, this is where my brain falls here. It would have been nothing more than a cheat. So in order to get him to live, you really have to go and completely change the dynamic of the story altogether. But that's not the story that they told. The story that they told was one where if you are going to give of your Force power to somebody, especially if it's somebody that's dead, that's the difference too. Think about, those were just some scrapes on that snake. Those were just some scrapes on his arm in The Mandalorian. And yet, Rey felt, she's like, yeah, boy, that really took something out of me. Those were just scars. Those were just scrapes. Rey was dead. And Ben Solo, in that moment, decided that he was going to bring her back. And then you get this beautiful, beautiful moment of the two of them embracing and perhaps even sharing the first kiss of their entire lives in that beautiful moment. And I love the dynamic between Ben Solo and Rey in that final moment before his passing, because it really does, in my view, go and show how much Ben really did love her and was connected to her in that way from the get-go. And that's where the sequel trilogy does better what the prequel trilogy did. The prequel trilogy, George Lucas took that relationship between Anakin and Padme and made it more in the tune of the 30s and 40s and made it a little bit more over the top with the dialogue and a little bit cheesier because of the type of film that he was trying to go and create. And it didn't work for a lot of people. And it doesn't work for me. I wish I could wish away my feelings, right? That was a very teenagery love story that, you know, I enjoy it, and for what it is. It's a little hokey, but it works. But what the sequel trilogy did is they actually took this mythological Star Wars universe and created this really meaningful arc between these two characters being drawn to one another that culminates in this amazing 7-second kiss on screen before before Ben Solo ultimately sacrifices himself for this woman that he loves. That's true love in the end. And yes, I love the fact that Rey takes on the Skywalker name at the end of the movie. In no way, shape, or form does that point to me that Palpatine wins. He didn't win. He absolutely didn't win. Vader was redeemed because of the love of his son and the love of a father to a son, right? And at the end of this movie, Palpatine is defeated by somebody of his own blood, and not only that, they denounce his name and they take on the name of the individual who he's been fighting against from the get-go of this saga. It's the ultimate burn, and it's a great message of, just like in the story, right? You know, your bloodline doesn't necessarily define you. You define you, right? Your beliefs go and define you. And so I get why people are upset. I don't agree with it. I think it was beautiful. I think it was a spectacular way to cap this off. I think that Ben Solo had some amazing moments in those final scenes when he was alive at the end of the Rise of Skywalker, and him transforming into the Force at the end. I go back to Yoda: mourn them, do not; miss them, do not. We should not mourn those that transform into the Force. He's in a better place now. And I also think it's good for the franchise, because now you don't have to deal with either this, well, I guess Rey and Ben are going to have children now, and that'll be the future of the stories. No. And who's to say that beyond that connection and this emotional journey that these two dual protagonists went on, who's to say that relationship would have even worked in the long term? It didn't with Han and Leia. No, I thought it was done perfectly, and I couldn't be happier with this film, and I can't wait to go and see it again and to be able to watch all of these movies together as one. All right, so I completely went off on a tangent. I had no expectation or no thought whatsoever, or no plan whatsoever of going as long as I did with this opening commentary at 43 minutes of an opening commentary. So let's get into some listener feedback. And then what I'll do is at the end of listener feedback, I'm going to cap off the show at the end with this brief conversation that I had with my wife and her thoughts about The Rise of Skywalker and how much she enjoyed it.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, we start off with D'Artagnan Magic, who writes this. You know, for almost as long as I've been alive, 45 years, it was if someone spoiled something like a football game or a soccer match you'd yet to see. They get ostracized or worse. That sucked, by the way. I'm just going to say this up front. There were a lot of people that were upset that Ben Solo died, to the point where before I even saw the movie on Thursday night last week, they were grabbing the bootleg shots of the film and posting them on Twitter, all because they were mad and they wanted to ruin the experience for other people. And those were people from the Reylo community doing that. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. It was so disappointing. So shame on those individuals. Obviously, if that wasn't you, that's fine. I'm not talking about you. But if you shared spoiler pictures before the movie was, or even within the first few days at all, shame on you for doing that, man. All right, Severin, friend of the show, says this. I just wanted to say thanks for all your incredible talks, analysis, news, rants, laughs, and insight into the Star Wars galaxy these many long months before our wait for 9. It was almost a full year ago that I had a chance to encounter with one of your Reylo title podcasts on YouTube, and after one click, my inner fledgling Reylo flame became full-blown bonfire. Your weekend podcasts have become such a routine in my chore schedule, I'm a little concerned that I lost the ability to clean the house without listening to my Nerd World in the most positive way possible. I've grown from being a relatively passive fan to a complete Bendemption at all things Star Wars nerd in the span of 11 months, and boy, has it been a ride of a lifetime. Now, just a few short days away from the release of The Rise of Skywalker, my fangirl giddiness has morphed into something more like confident calmness. Whatever happens, I'm ready. There is no death. There is only the Force. I can't wait to listen in next time and bask in the glory of this beautiful film with all the other sequel enthusiasts. Merry Reylomas and a happy new year. Thank you very much for that, Severin. I really do appreciate the comment. And let me add this, since I haven't had a chance to make the comment yet. Heading into the new year, I'm probably going to be retitling the show to Positively Star Wars, presented by My Nerd World. I'm going to do that because I want to. I want this podcast to be a place for positivity and for people to escape the irrational, negative commentary coming from certain segments of the fandom. That's not to say we can't criticize, right? No Star Wars film is perfect. I have things that I could point to and nitpick from every single Star Wars movie, but I definitely want My Nerd World to be a place where people can feel like, hey man, I just want to go and just hear somebody talk about Star Wars in a positive way. That's what Positively Star Wars will be. And it always has been. I just wanted to have a title that reflected that. So that's the plan heading in the next year. All right, Jen G says this. I remember coming out of The Last Jedi and felt overwhelmed, and I felt I needed more time to process what I saw. And I worked through it and loved it. I know a bunch more about this movie, having not held myself back from spoilers, leaks, picks, etc. While I haven't liked certain things I know from The Rise of Skywalker, I've also learned that knee-jerk reactions, as you call it, has taught me to not go off the deep end and just wait and see how the whole film sits with me. I've made a few Twitter comments about it without giving any spoilers away or going off on any off-the-cuff rant. I wouldn't mind seeing some of these writers and directors maybe try their hand at a motion picture talking about how Episode 7 of The Mandalorian was great. I'd be curious to see what your thoughts are now, Jen J. I don't know if you've Jen G. I don't know if you wrote again, but I'll as I work through the emails here, maybe you did. But I'd be obviously curious to see what you thought of the movie now. And thank you so much for your comment. All right, Chris Pittman, very short. Thank you, John. Appreciate you so much. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate your comment and your kind words. JG writes this. So glad for your level-headed outlook. I need voices like yours among the wailing and gnashing of teeth coming from all sides of the fandom. Now, not just now, but over the last several years. I opened my Twitter on Tuesday morning, and it was a big mistake. Spoilers being thrown everywhere without regard. I was at first sad that much I'd hoped for in my own mind seemed to be lost. Not all, but some. But in a way, I'm glad I'm not going in totally blind. I've had some time to come to terms with my own head and hopefully just enjoy the story that gets told. And again, a lot of these comments were sent to me prior to the release of the movie, obviously. All right, Kyle Bookout says this. Thanks for the last words of positivity and fandom encouragement. Your podcast has made my year, man. Thank you, Kyle. And my middle name and my son's first name. No matter what happens, you've made the speculation, analysis, and hype so fun. Have a great holiday, John, and thanks for all you do. Thank you, Kyle. Olga says this. I just saw it. Right? It's stunning, super emotional, epic, human, and a lot of exclamation points. They are from Greece. Thank you, Olga. We got a couple of emails from Miranda. Here's the first one. You've been one of the best podcast channels ever. Glad to have found you after your appearance on one of the Girls with Sabers podcasts. I'm looking forward to talking about the movie with you and everyone else. Hope you're enjoying yourself. Thank you, Miranda. Brett writes this. Thank you again for the podcast. Whenever I put you on the negativity that's out there, it gets real quite. I don't quite understand that. That was worded weird. It's almost like Ben Kenobi telling me to use the Force while in the trench run in the lead up to the Rise of Skywalker. Okay, I got you. Thank you, Brett. Jamie M. writes this. Loved it too! Exclamation point. No-tailed fox. Nine-tailed fox. Took me a long time to land on that. Nine-tailed fox? Sure. I'm glad you had such a positive reaction to the movie. In comparison to all the negativity surrounding the film, I thank you for your positivity. You are a light in this community. Thank you. Sorry I butchered your username. Betsy writes this. Just saw it with my kids. Aside from about 10 minutes total of the movie, I hated it. I'm a fan since 1977, and I can't believe it. Utterly in shock over senseless and fan-servicey it is. Complete retcon of past movies and made one kid cry and terrified my youngest. I can't express how I feel right now. Crushed, angry, sad. I'm truly happy for you if you got something positive out of it, and I hope your positivity will help me view this more favorably in the future once my anger has faded. I don't look, and again, everybody's entitled to their opinion on this, but I don't understand the fan servicey part. I don't know. I guess I just had a different viewpoint on that, right? None of the fan servicey things in the film I thought were even fan servicey. It's just Star Wars. I don't know. I feel like, and Betsy, I'm not saying you did this, but I feel like a lot of times people just toss that out there because they haven't quite zeroed in on exactly what their frustration is or why they didn't like something. But again, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. All right, let's get into this one. And I'm trying to look. I think the person's remaining anonymous on this. So, all right, we'll call them JJ, since that's part of their email. Didn't want to talk spoilers in the spoiler-free podcast, but now that you're past that, I love this movie and didn't expect to, considering, well, Twitter. The visuals were fantastic. The music was probably some of the best John Williams has done for the franchise. Totally agree. Now, I did see a bit of fan service, specifically the ships that people wanted to see. Rose still pined for Finn, and Finn still pined for Rey. I'm shaking my head, and Rey was oblivious. See, I don't take that, by the way. People keep saying that. As a matter of fact, John Boyega even cleared that up. So just as a point, John Boyega, Finn's character in the film, wanting to tell Rey something, he was wanting to tell Rey that he was feeling the Force, not that he was in love with her. And John Boyega actually said that on Twitter. That Finn was not going to tell Rey that he was in love with her. It was clear, in my view, that he was going to tell Rey that he was Force sensitive. Okay. They also threw in there the Poe-Finn bromance and Poe-Rey bickering. I thought that was all great, in my opinion. It seemed to be trying to give a little something to everybody, although I can firmly say Rose deserved better than Finn, but the fan service didn't smack me in the face. Okay. One of my favorite scenes was when Finn was running to Rey while she was fighting with Kylo, and she used her power to throw him back and yelled no. I pictured her saying in her mind, "This is my private time with my man, LOL." The whole Rey fighting Palpatine, Red Guards, while Kylo fought the Knights of Ren. How she force ghosted the lightsaber doom was phenomenal. Loved the lightsaber battle the most, that one. Ben's vulnerability in this was very present, and his convo with Han was as well, dropping his lightsaber when he felt his... let me back up here, sorry. Ben's vulnerability in this was very present, and his conversation with Han, as well as dropping his lightsaber when he felt his mother die, got me. Well, he got to me the whole movie. He was just awesome. The Reylo kiss, nothing more to say here. Reylo is canon, like we all have sensed, but said and seen since TFA, but now is the validation, and he smiled. Hated the death. Couldn't they give him 5 minutes with her? Just 5 minutes is all I'm asking. I know you felt it was right, but I didn't think it was needed since Rey went off to live isolated anyways. She could have lived with him. And I get my, something. It's chops off here. I don't think that Rey stayed on Tatooine, by the way. And everybody that wasn't my assumption. It wasn't like they saw her setting up shop. I think she went there for one reason and one reason only. I think she went there to go and bury Luke and Leia's lightsabers to craft her own. There is a part of me that thinks that he... and I know somebody pushes back on me, and we'll get to that on here. I do believe that Rey used the Kyber crystals, the green one and the blue one, from those lightsabers respectively to craft her own lightsaber made from her staff. That's what I think happened, even though I know some people disagree with me. But I think part of the reason why she had the Falcon and BB-8 was because she wasn't going to stay there on Tatooine. That was my takeaway, at least. Rey taking the Skywalker name, I know why she did, and I'm okay with her reasoning, but she's not a Skywalker. And they killed off all of them on top of that. I feel the blood lineage could have lived on. Finn being all of a sudden Force sensitive, nope, not needed at all. Oh, and poor Hux, he got like 5 minutes of airtime and was killed. And that's it for my dislikes. I can live with them, especially since I will probably repeat watch only for the Reylo kiss. Something that totally surprised me was how much I enjoyed Poe and Finn with Chewie, Rey, R2, and C-3PO, and that little robot. Up until this movie, I felt like the connection to Poe and Finn. I felt little connection to Poe and Finn, and I think putting them all together really helped me connect to those two from how well they all worked together. All right. Thank you for the comments, JJ. I appreciate it. All right. Let's go to friend of the show, Ryan. First off, big thank you to you. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that. After The Last Jedi came out, I had a lot of people telling me how I should feel about that movie, and not in a positive way. You moved away from Tucson, and one day I was curious to see what you were up to there in Minnesota and found my nerd world. Without making this too long, I just want to say thank you for the things that I have learned from you regarding the positive approach to Star Wars fandom. 1. Make genuine content and you'll reach the largest audience you're capable of. Rian Johnson and JJ both made their genuine content. I absolutely agree. 2, instead of getting spun up with my own headcanon, view the saga as a history, and we're seeing the story how it unfolded. John, those 2 points go way beyond Star Wars. Yes, they do. They have helped me enjoy fiction a lot more. I found my escapism again, and after years of nitpicking and being overly critical and cynical of movies, books, and shows, thank you 100 times over. Thank you for EMBARK and creating more escapism for me. Wow, Ryan, thank you so much. This is a late Christmas gift. That movie was amazing. Star Wars is amazing. You're amazing. Your dad is amazing for taking you to see what the hype was over some space wizard movie back in the summer of 1977. Bless you, John Ryan. Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, Ryan, I really do appreciate the comments. All right, Sophia says this. I wanted so badly to like this movie, but I just can't. Nothing was good about it. Okay. Diskeezy Pro, frequent commenter, friend of the show, says this. First reaction, they did it. A fitting end. Not perfect, but good and satisfying. Don't listen to the critics and keep an open mind and enjoy it. Dale Erdman says this. Thanks for the show, John. I wish people would use their brains. I've seen a lot of comments about how the first Last Jedi scene was referenced in I think it was the last third of the movie when Luke tosses Anakin's saber over his shoulder. Then people say it was a jab at Ryan. The way I interpreted it was showing how much influence, clouded judgment, and manipulation Sidious had on the Jedi. Even and especially Luke. Totally agree. He did his thing so subtly it wasn't apparent, even to Yoda, and to cause him to not act on knowing about Order 66. Yes, Yoda knew about the Order before it happened and did nothing as if it was part of the prophecy. That the trade-off was for the Jedi to end the Sith as well. I had the same thought about Luke catching the saber and saying, a Jedi should treat this with more respect. I didn't see that as a slight on Rian Johnson. I saw it as Luke slighting himself for being so stupid to toss it off to the side in the first place, and that was the whole point. Friend of the show, Patrick, writes this. Having watched the Rise of Skywalker, I can start off by saying, wow. Like you, I take these movies as living history of Star Wars. There are things to discuss and debate for years to come, as with all Star Wars movies. Like what did Finn want to say? Again, like I said, he wanted to say he was Force sensitive. I would love to hear your theories about that as well. I have 2 theories, and one is that he loved Rey. Nope. Or is it that he felt the Force brought them together and had a connection to it? That's the second one. Let's see. Also, the lack of explanation for Palpatine having a son who then had a family on Jakku. However, it was a big, meaty movie, so I understand how some of this is going unexplained, and overall, they did an awesome job. Having not delved into the leaks and only getting what partial spoilers I had heard from your show, I have to say they went with some surprising directions, and I respected. And after digesting the entire movie, I loved it. Their treatment of Carrie Fisher, Princess Leia, was masterful, and we got to see Rey fly Luke's X-Wing. Yep, which brought a tear to my eye. I was bawling, but made me giggle inside knowing you were probably bawling your eyes out at that sight. Yes, I was. Also, Luke following in Yoda's footsteps by being the one to raise it up was priceless. And Reylos everywhere had their moment at the end of the film. When the kiss, which got some gasps of approval in my theater. Overall, this was a wild ride from beginning to end, and I can't wait to see a couple more times at least in the theater. I especially look forward to your spoiler review, and the future episodes will all have to digest and discuss the end to this masterful saga that has touched us all for the past 42 years. Sorry for the long-windedness, but I had a lot to go through in my own head, and this was after discussing most of this with my buddy who saw the film with me. I have spoken, and may the Force be with you, John. Thank you, Patrick, as always, for your comments, man. I really do appreciate it. Man, I was listening to another podcast, and I'm hesitant to go and say who it was and call it out. But I couldn't believe, well, I'm not going to say who it was. I'll just tell you what the comment was. And if you happen to listen to this particular podcast and know what I'm talking about, then you'll know what I'm referencing. But there was one particular podcast who, for the most part, I I respect. It's one of the few that I can still listen to. I think sometimes they're off the mark in some of their commentary. It gets a little bit ridiculous. For example, this particular podcast was taking issue over the Salacious Crumb-esque monkey lizard being roasted in one of the Mandalorian episodes. They were like legitimately upset that this sentient being was being roasted, and there was another one in a cage staring along. I just was kind of like, okay. Anyway, one of the in their reaction show for the Rise of Skywalker, the female host of the show, talking about her experience in going and seeing this film, said that when the Reylo kiss happened, she blurted out "bleh," or something like that, like an audible sign of disgust in the theater. And then she went on to laugh about it, like, "Oh yeah, I know. I bet I annoyed some people." I was like, wow, that was a jerk move. I don't understand that. And she seemed not to have any problem with it, unless she realized that what she did was really rude, but couldn't bring herself to admit it. But I couldn't believe what I was listening to. I honestly ended up turning the podcast off after that, because I was kind of like, you're a Star Wars fan. This particular podcast preaches positivity and everybody, being kind to one another. And yet you just admitted that you let out an audible disapproval during the premiere of this movie because of something that happened on the screen you didn't like. I mean, if you were sitting next to me, boy, how much of an experience, how much of my experience would have been ruined by your thoughtlessness? I was very bothered by that. Anyway. All right, moving on. Sorry. Alex says this, loved it, especially the last 30 minutes. The pacing was horrendous. Yeah, like I said before, the pacing doesn't bother me at all anymore, and it did in the beginning. I thought the first half of the movie was way too choppy, but after seeing it multiple times, I don't have any problems with the pacing whatsoever. Anissa writes this, I wanted to sincerely like this movie while watching it, but most of the scenes in this one just felt hollow. Not one emotion was felt throughout those entire 2 hours. I'm glad you enjoyed it along with some others. There were just too many plot holes and inconsistent patterns for me to enjoy it. But that ending was definitely open for a new beginning. There may be hope for the future. We'll have to wait and see. Thank you, Anissa. All right, Monica, friend of the show, writes this. Something deep inside me, it's always been there, but now it's almost dead, and I need help. My heart is broken for this movie, this saga, and most of all, our beloved Ben. What a sad, undeserved, hope-destructing, reckless ending for this family. What a joke of a mother and her Uncle Leia and Luke turned out to be. Seriously, somebody call social services. John, I have listened to you for the past 9 months. Each podcast sharing the excitement, brushing off the haters for The Last Jedi, defending Disney and their creative choices. But this is just too much for me right now. I've never cried this hard and this long over fictional characters. I'm sorry. That's a bummer. That was the experience that you had. I don't know what to say. Right? Everybody is entitled to their own opinions and feelings. I obviously disagree. This movie was, I never cried. I cried more during this film than I have any other Star Wars movie from beginning to end. For a lot of different reasons, but a lot of it because of just how emotionally deep it was. And I really appreciate that story of Kylo Ren and Rey. There's something, or Ben Solo and Rey. There's something incredibly profound and a really good lesson there of what true love means. And true love means, to a certain extent, right, not a lot of what true love means, in my opinion, is putting yourself above that other person that you love, right? I mean, that's how we as husbands are supposed to treat our wives, and that's what Ben did in the end. He put Rey's life ahead of his own, knowing it was probably going to cost him. That was beautiful. What better way to express, the love of somebody else? But he also had to pay a price for his actions and his sins and what he did in the past. So, all right, moving on. Ben writes this. Saw The Rise of Skywalker last night. Wanted to pass along some quick comments. I thought the movie paced itself well. I loved the plot and how it tied into The Last Jedi. I was one of the people that, after watching The Last Jedi, was a little disappointed. The movie grew on me, but felt underwhelmed right after leaving the theater. This movie did not do that. I actually think this movie puts perspective on The Last Jedi after you watch it and made me appreciate what they did in TLJ even more. After leaving TLJ, I was disappointed. I didn't know more about Snoke, but this movie tells you it didn't matter who he was. Going off memory of the spoilers, I haven't gone back to read them. I was surprised at how closely the spoilers lined up with the movie. I liked the ending. I didn't need Reylo and thought it put a nice bow on that story. I have a hard time picking up voices, so I would be curious to all who the Jedi voices were you hear at the end. Yeah, I don't have the list in front of me. I'll have to cover that on another episode. I mean, I know Mace Windu, Luke, Leia was obviously in there. Anakin Skywalker was obviously in there. Obi-Wan Kenobi was in there. Ahsoka was in there. Mace Windu was in there. I think Ayla Secura was in there. I don't know. I don't think Ezra was. But I'll have the list on another episode. Let's see. Were those actually Rey's parents or surrogates? Will we ever find out? Those are actually Rey's parents. When R2 puts the memory back into C-3PO, I didn't quite catch what C-3PO says about the mission they were about to go on. Just curious if that was a little Easter egg on his memory. No, I think it was just based on the last time he recorded it, he was about to go off with Rey. I was surprised at how much footage they had of Carrie Fisher. She died just after they were wrapping up TLJ, and every scene she was in the movie made sense to the final plot. I will have to do some reading to see if that's explained better now that the movie is released. Thank you always for the comment, Ben. I appreciate it. FN1189 says this, for what it is, I love this film. I knew you would too, John. Thank you. Friend of the show, Everson, says this, the film was great. I love how they tied in elements from the prequels to the final chapter. Palpatine saying the dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural basically confirms that he manipulated the midichlorians to create life, which I never thought they would bring back, but they did, and it was amazing. I also want to point out that Ben is Anakin backwards. He starts off bad and turns out good by the end of the trilogy to save the girl he loved. And that's something that my wife pointed out, was that Ben Solo did what Anakin Skywalker couldn't. And I hadn't even thought about that. My wife thought about that. It was amazing. She said that Ben Solo went and accomplished saving the one that he loved and did what Anakin couldn't do. Because Anakin didn't have the power at the time, but he was also too selfish at the time to realize that. To a certain extent. I know, I'm probably opening up a can of worms there. But let me just say, again, to what my wife was saying, I'll take back a little bit of that. I'll do some further analysis on an upcoming show. But Ben Solo was able to accomplish what Anakin Skywalker couldn't in saving the one that he loved. All right. Ben finished, to go on with Everson's comment, what Anakin started by finally learning to keep the ones he cared about from dying, which he does when he brings Rey back from the dead at the end of the movie. When absorbing the life force out of Ben and Rey, Palpatine even mentions that it was a power not seen in generations. To cheat death is a power only one has achieved, but if we work together, I know we can discover the secret. Palpatine to Anakin right after he kills Mace Windu. P.S. Darth Sidious also says, do it to Rey, which is the best thing ever. Epic finale. It is an amazing final chapter. All right. Bonnie Fisher writes this, listening to the spoiler-free podcast. I'm glad you liked it. Thank you for your hopeful reaction. I did need to know if Ben Solo dies before I see it. I did find out that he does die. But to me, it appears they could have done a couple of different things differently instead of killing Ben Solo and then have Rey so happy. Right now, I cannot see it because there's simply too much grief in my real life with loved ones and the health issues. I needed the movie to be even more hopeful, Ben living. I do understand it's a creative choice. As soon as I can accept that, I will see it. I am hoping that as I deal with putting my grief into perspective in my own life, I will be able to see and maybe even like the movie, says Bonnie. That part of it, again, there's so much of the negativity I just don't understand. But, Rey grieving, first off, we don't know how long it was when Rey went to go visit Tatooine at the end of the film. Two, I don't know. I didn't need to see Rey grieving. She was obviously upset at the end after Ben passed, but I also took it as Rey understood what had to happen. Right? And again, going back to what Obi-Wan said to Anakin in Revenge of the Sith, worried about losing someone he loved, mourn them, do not miss them, do not celebrate those that transfer into the Force. And so Rey having, being all the Jedi and being a Jedi herself, she understood that. Eddie's account writes this: sorry, but they did no justice to the Skywalker family. I get the message of family taking you and how love is stronger than blood, but Disney just wanted to be done with the Skywalkers. If this trilogy would have been called something else, then it would have been fine. But to me, the trilogy took a giant pile of poo on the last 6 films. Okay, disagree. But again, art is subjective. Lewis says this: discovered your podcast this summer. Since then, you've been my go-to source for all things Star Wars. Your enthusiasm and knowledge make for a great listening experience. I'd been exposed to some of the spoilers of this movie, as well as the negative criticism for those who saw the advanced screening. Needless to say, I wasn't very optimistic about what I was about to see Thursday night. I wanted to thank you for the bonus podcast addressing the reviews ahead of the release of the film. Your 25-minute pep talk did wonders for my attitude. I saw the movie and absolutely loved it. Thank you for sharing your love of the Star Wars universe. It's contagious. P.S. I was 13 years old in 77 when the original came out. I'm 56 today, and I felt the same sense of wow I experienced as a young boy. I did too, Lewis. And I really do think that this particular email, anecdotal at best, though, is a good representation of why the opening box office of the movie was slower than people had expected, but now it seems to be picking up steam. All right, Scotian writes this: John, I am happy you loved the movie and found joy with it. Seeing a trend here. I have always loved your reviews and podcasts. We'll continue to do so. For myself, I'm completely gutted by the ending. To have Ben Solo come back and to die after all the tragedy and suffering the Skywalkers have been through makes every sacrifice done by Han, Luke, and Leia in this trilogy pointless. Basically, we are now told that the only way a person can be redeemed is through death, which is such a cop-out. Ben was abused and manipulated all his life by Palpatine, and the recent Kylo Ren comics just makes the ending more brutal. Ben's smile after Rey and he kissed was beautifully tragic, and he was so happy. I just ... sad face. Finally, they are the dyad, 2 parts of a whole. Rey is alone without her other half who understands her, which is so sad and just too much. I am sorry for the negativity. Most of the Reylo community is grieving. That's okay. You're entitled to your opinion. I'm glad that you're still with the show, even though we go and disagree and just have different viewpoints on how that ending fleshed out. Rome says this: I watched The Rise of Skywalker twice Thursday night. I have to say I loved this movie. I was surprised to read that some critics called it the worst Star Wars movie. Wow. I really liked The Last Jedi, but I can understand why it was so divisive. But I don't understand why Rise is becoming that. Let's just say I'm more surprised that it's already becoming divisive. Either way, who cares? I loved it, and everyone is entitled to what they like and don't. Can't wait to see it again. Thank you, Rome. John Dean says this: the C-3PO scene was good. I appreciate your brevity. All right, Miranda's back and says this: I just got back from seeing it today and will be going Saturday morning with my sister, but I got to say, never in my life have I seen a movie that within days before its debut has it become such a circus online, at least between the press and all the interviews and what was said from the cast and the director and others. The usual perpetual hoopla from certain YouTubers weighing in on everything because what else is going on at the moment. And then the leaks and the people posting them all over social media, especially after the premiere, and everyone rightfully freaking out. I was just next level crazy town like I've never been before I even saw the film. Oddly enough, none of it, even what I found out in one or more critical scenes by accident, stopped me from going and didn't let it affect me that way. It actually made me better prepared for what I was in for, and I accepted it, and I am okay with dealing with the things in the film that I didn't like and didn't work for me. I don't consider it the best Star Wars film I've ever seen, but I'll keep seeing it and holding on to what I will eventually appreciate more over time and accept what I have problems with, but also see the benefits within the flaws eventually. However, To the persons that were responsible for posting the pictures and leaking them online for the world to see after the screening a couple weeks back at the El Capitan, I hope they realize how wrong and selfish they were in doing that and getting away with it. I was so wrong. I was so wrong of them. It was so wrong of them, and they should be ashamed of themselves for causing a stir online. Not okay. Totally agree. Friend of the show, Aunt Vesuvi, who's been around since the beginning, I think. I loved it too, John. And both screenings I attended, the audience showed audible laughing, gasping, cheering, and crying signs of having loved it, all the way to the rousing applause during the end credits. Hashtag I love Star Wars, may the Force be with us all. Thank you, Aunt Vesuvi. Olga writes this. I still struggle with the fact that Ben died. In the arms of the woman he loved? ? Yes. But why every Star Wars couple has to suffer? They should be together. They earned it with their lives. The main reason that was so much impact on Star Wars fan is the incredible acting of Driver and Daisy Ridley. All right. Everson was back and says this. It was so beautiful that it ended with a fairy tale vibe, especially Rey and Ben's final scene. Totally agree. Let's see here. Stephanie S. says this. Thank you for your positivity. God bless you. Merry Christmas. Thank you, Stephanie. Across the stars. Putting aside the fact that they killed off Ben for no good reason, it was Palpatine's saga. He was really the winner. He managed to wipe out the last Skywalker solos, and the writers just took everything from them, from the maternal things to Anakin's original defeat of Palps to even their name, and just handed it all to Palpatine's descendant. His bloodline lives on. They could have at least made Rey pregnant at the end so those bloodlines could live on as well. Absolute disrespect is astounding. Again, I'll mention it. I just disagree. I think that it was actually the ultimate slap in the face to Palpatine that Rey would completely push aside her lineage and accept the name of the individuals that brought the ultimate end to the ultimate evil. Right. Again, I've said that many times already on the show. Let's move on. All right. Friend of the show, Serial Chiller. I have mixed feelings about the film. It was a fun ride, and there were some really funny moments. Babu Frick was an instant favorite. My heart is broken over Ben Solo's death, but that's not my problem with the film. I just felt like the whole film was a shrine to the original trilogy with a lot of callbacks that took me away from the story at hand. The end battle was underwhelming and a missed opportunity to see Anakin and Obi-Wan. Plus, Ben was hardly there. The moments, literally just moments, we get to see Ben Solo in action were glorious. I would have liked it a little bit more time with Ben Solo. The more Reylo wouldn't have hurt either. I did think it was beautiful how he sacrificed himself for Rey. However, the ending left me feeling sad and lonely. I was really hoping to feel happy, and I didn't. All right. Monica writes this. Apologizing up front, saying that while they appreciate my positivity, this time they can't share it. I'm sorry this is going to be long, but I feel safe here with you and your audience to share my thoughts. My heart is bleeding for Ben Solo and what the writers did to the Skywalker family. Not only a Palpatine is the only person alive taking over their family name, but how Luke and Leia treated Ben broke my heart even more. Luke trained a Palpatine, yet tried to kill his own nephew. Also, hey, good idea, Leia, to reach out to Ben through the Force. What a shame it came up with this 10 years too late. How did they even know she was a Palpatine? A feeling like they tried to explain everything in this movie, and poor Ben, the only freaking thing he said literally was ow when he fell after the jump. It hurts me even more because Adam exceeded my wildest expectations for his portraying of Ben. His body language, the faces he made, the cockiness, the blaster shooting, how he looked at Rey, and what he ultimately did for her, all without words. The first audience gasped at the kiss because many people were either surprised or happy he died. And he died 3 seconds later, which made people laugh out loud. I've been 3 more times just because I love the character so much, and this has happened every time. Well, I haven't had that experience at all, not once. Poor directing, what a waste of a broadly loved character. After the screening, I bumped into a young teenage girl in the bathroom in the theater, and she was on the edge of bursting into tears. She literally said to her mom, everybody died like in Rogue One. She clearly cared for Leia and Ben more than even Rey, which was supposed to be the heroine for little girls. I guess it is indeed a secret of the Sith. Let's see, let me back up here. I decided to skip the poor rush story, bad pace, jokes, inappropriate places, stupid explanations for literally everything. You know what my favorite quote was? I wrote it down because it was too much. Dominic Monaghan's dark side cloning Secrets of the Sith. I guess it is indeed a secret of the Sith. How the heck did they let the screenplay leak months before the premiere? Help my bleeding heart out, my dear John and community. You're my only hope. Okay. Sorry, that was wonky, mostly because of my reading. Again, if I haven't done so far, going any further right now, but it probably isn't going to help. I've made many comments about my thoughts about the film, so hopefully that's already helped out a little bit. They did also write, how was Ben responsible for billions of death? I don't recall him taking part of any Starkiller base, planet destroying. Whatever else would sum up to billions, he was present, but it was Hux and later Pride. And I explained my thoughts on that. There is still a level of culpability with regard to the passing of, or with regard to the destruction of the Hosnian system. He didn't lead the First Order, even though he didn't pull the trigger. Okay. Moving on. Mitzi K writes this. I'm sad that all the Skywalkers are dead. I felt that the deck was stacked against Ben Solo from before he was even born, so I was hoping he would have more than 2 seconds of happiness for once in his tragic life. I get why JJ had him died. I just wish he had more time after his redemption. Yeah. All right. Let's thank you for the comment, Mitzi, and we'll move over to let's see here. Let's go to Irene Davis. Just says thank you, John. Thank you, Irene. Jenny. Oh, here we go. Jen G writes back from earlier in the show. John, after you do your breakdown of the Rise of Skywalker, you should go back and do bullet point types of things for each of the 9 movies in the saga, discussing strengths and weaknesses. It would be interesting to see what you think on each and what the listeners think. Thank you for your podcast as always, and Merry Christmas. Thank you, Jen G. I appreciate that. Let's see. Let's go to, sorry, I'm poking through here. I want to get to, here we go. Arderaith writes this, friend of the show. Hate to say it, I hate this movie. It's a narrative mess. With too much exposition, poor character development, too many new story threads, bad editing, really dislike Rey Palpatine, the things Luke's ghost says, more war as a solution. I couldn't believe what I was watching. Thank you for the comment, Arderaith. Appreciate that. Skydrathic, friend of the show, says this. Oh, dear one can hear it in the voice. I have no idea what that means. I actually replied on YouTube with a question mark because I have no idea what that means and never got a response. So, okay. Chris writes this. I loved the movie too, and I was cynical going in. I was worried about the return of Palpatine and JJ's desire to tie up the 9 movies. I will gladly eat crow as he succeeded on both fronts. The movie gave me everything I wanted to close the book on Luke, Leia, and Han. The movie also gave me things I didn't want but ended up loving. I was steadfast against the redemption of Kylo Ren as he was the villain who killed Han Solo, but I started to sympathize with him as his change started to come, and I totally bought his redemption at the end of the movie. I could go on and on writing another 10-page review, but you get my drift. I'm roughly the same age as you, born in 72, so our generation went on this journey together, and it came full circle this weekend. The Rise of Skywalker was the perfect ending for me, so why not ride it off into the sunset on top? That's what I'm doing. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate that. Purple Flower writes this. Like many people, I would have preferred Ben Solo to live. I understand that he did a lot of terrible stuff, but he could have lived to do good. It would have been a different and interesting choice for once. Now, I found it very romantic that Ben gave what was left of his life force to bring Rey back. I'm also grateful for the kiss, which was something I did not think they would have the guts to do. I did not either, since a lot of people were against Reylo. One of my issues lies with how fast he died and how only Rey, and maybe Maz, knew that he turned to the light. It should have been more important to recognize that Rey was alive because of Ben, especially since he was the son of their beloved General Leia. Anyway, still an enjoyable movie. I'm just not a fan of the ending. I guess to that I would say that when it comes to the comment there from Purple Flower about Rey and Maz maybe being the only ones that knew that Ben turned to good. That similar thing happened with Return of the Jedi and Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker as well. So I kind of saw the parallels there and had no problem with it. All right, Teeny243 says this. I just watched the review of Star Wars Explained did on his channel, and it echoes almost exactly what I feel about the movie. Even after carefully considering everything you said here, there are so many things in the movie that just didn't work for me personally. I still don't see the point of having 9 movies called the Skywalker Saga that culminated in only a Palpatine being able to kill Palpatine while almost literally standing on the bodies of all the Skywalkers who had sacrificed themselves just for this outcome. Thank you, Teeny. I appreciate that. Let's see. We'll go to Michael says this. So wait, the ancient Sith dagger has old Sith writing on it, but it knew to line up with the crashed Death Star remains? How did they know 1,000 years ago where the Death Star would crash? I'm sure the ancient Sith dagger was engraved with the location of the Wayfinder based on the crashed Death Star after the Death Star exploded and landed on Kef Bir. That was my takeaway. My takeaway was, it was an ancient Sith dagger. Ochi probably inherited the dagger, and then as being an assassin of the Sith, went and etched in the location of where the Wayfinder would be found in the remains of the Death Star post Return of the Jedi. At least that was my take on it. Let's see. VT writes this. Hi, John. Listen to your podcast all the time. I just never leave a comment, but I had to leave one this time. I'm glad you enjoyed the movie. For me, it wasn't great, but it also wasn't bad. There's a Nerdist article by Lindsay Romaine that highlights the way I feel perfectly. I hope you have the opportunity to read it and really understand the frustrations that some feel towards Disney and Lucasfilm. I am a fan who read all the books and the comics, and I'm starting to wonder what was the point of this character and the ancillary material about his past they wanted to release until this year. I did go and read that Lindsay Romaine article, and Lindsay Romaine was somebody whose writings about Reylo I really appreciated, but obviously I completely disagreed with their take and frustration over what Disney and Lucasfilm had done. And I guess from my perspective, this goes back to hardcore fandom being minority, casual fans being the majority. And most casual fans are never going to read the ancillary material. Now, again, for those that are reading the ancillary material and we're getting a different read or vibe off of Ben Solo, I've read a majority of that about Kylo Ren as well, and I personally didn't have that take. I think your viewpoint is going to largely be defined by how you ended up feeling about the ending of this movie. If you didn't like the way that Ben Solo's arc concluded with him dying, then I can certainly see how you can point to the ancillary comics and books and say that doesn't align with the ancillary comics and books. However, as somebody who did agree with Ben's passing at the end of the movie and did read those ancillary materials, I don't see any of those ancillary materials for me personally contradicting in any extreme way, shape, or form what ended up happening to Ben Solo in The Rise of Skywalker. For me personally, I didn't see that, right? It's all about perspectives, in my view. All right. Let's see. We'll go to Silver Maiden writes this. Can you please explain how the conclusion of Rey and Ben's story was satisfactory to you? I'm trying really, really hard to not hate it, but maybe your perspective can make me see things differently. I can't help but feel that the Skywalkers basically got screwed in this story. I love Rey, and at least I loved her from TFA to TLJ, but it just felt like it betrays the story and the narrative of the myth. How is it that Rey gets to defeat Palpatine on her own without Ben's help? That last Skywalker gets tossed into a pit, and the ultimate superpower is that Rey kills Palpatine by herself. Shouldn't the last surviving Skywalker at least have been there to lend his power? If they are the dyad, then how did she win the war without him? Even if she had to die, couldn't he have died fighting Palpatine? Or maybe they should have... Maybe both should have died. It doesn't sit well for me. All right, I won't go back into again and keep repeating myself for this. I think just in terms of story beats and the way that the story was playing out, and Rey, while Rey and Ben are dual protagonists, Rey is the ultimate protagonist. This is her story and journey. She was able to defeat Palpatine with the help of the Jedis before her. And so I just like from a narrative standpoint how that played out. I won't get into all the specifics of it right now. Let me add one more thing to the passing of Ben Solo at the end of this and why I don't have a hard time with it. And I will speak to this specifically from being a married, hopeless, romantic man. I appreciate both aspects that Ben Solo felt, and again, these are fictional characters, but I appreciate the fact that the way the story played out was that Ben Solo did realize in the end that the light side was where he needed to be, and he was redeemed in that, seeing the error of his ways and his mistakes of the past and having to reconcile them. I also very much appreciate the fact that he gave his life to save this woman that he loved. That's a very important lesson. And again, with somebody that we truly love and have decided to, at least in the real world, right? They weren't married in the film, but let's just say that he loved her that much that he would spend the rest of his life with her. That's how you should view that person that you love. Be willing to put them above you and before you. And the way that dynamic was set up, he couldn't save her life without giving his own. That's just the way the story played out. If he had saved her and then lived with everything that had come before it, I would have kind of been sitting back going, okay, that's nice, they lived. And I mentioned it before, I think there's a pathway there, but you'd have to fundamentally change the way you're telling the story, because why would any Jedi die if you can just use your life force to go and save the other person? And again, as a man, as a married man, I find that incredibly relatable. That Ben Solo loved her so much that he would give his life for her. Right? Okay, let's move on. Let's go to... Sorry, I'm working through my emails here. Irene writes this. John, on the third movie viewing, I am much more at ease and really enjoying the movie. For me, Ben's death played a large part at not being able to enjoy the movie. The story of Ben and Rey affected me on many levels, and I truly wanted him and Rey to stay alive. It is what it is. Just like in Titanic, I mourned the character. Anyone that has ever experienced loss or grief, lost a person very close to them, can identify. Now the tears have stopped and the quiet acceptance is its place, and I'm truly enjoying discovering all the Easter eggs, and I can't wait to read the novel. The movie flowed well. So, my friend, a very Merry Christmas to you and your family from your Star Wars family here in the UK. May the Force be with you always. Thank you very much for that, Irene. I appreciate it. Sue writes this. The end was dreadful. The first half was enjoyable. Very Star Warsy. Loved the Reylo kiss. No way to end this trilogy. Ben needed to live. Not half as good as The Last Jedi. Wish Rian Johnson had directed this one also. They go on to say, she's not a Skywalker. Sorry. Unless she's still connected with Ben in real life. Not fair to Ben and the Skywalkers that she just took the name. She is not a Skywalker, even though she's a full-fledged Jedi. Ugh. I'm sure all the kids loved it, though, and that is who it's geared for. See, I think the fact that Luke and Leia were standing there when she took the name and they were smiling tells me all I need to know. They accepted her being a Skywalker, and they wanted that to happen, in my opinion. Crystal writes this. I'm sorry, I think you're someone who will excuse most anything Star Wars to enjoy, which is great. However, I think this film was a slap in the face to the Lucasfilm Story Group and George Lucas. Unfortunately, I can no longer be a listener, but I wish you the best. Okay. Well, if you're not listening anymore, can I just tell... No, I won't. I'll be nice. By the way, a slap in the face to the Lucasfilm Story Group and the George Lucas... They consulted with Lucas on this movie. I would be very curious to see what Lucas' thoughts were on the decisions at the end of the film. Not to mention the fact that the story group signed off on the movie. Anyway, all right. John Roop writes this. This movie saved the trilogy for me. I loved it. And it's weird to be on this side of things for once. I see a lot of people dislike this film because it was just so much fun. I haven't left the theater after a Star Wars movie feeling that good in a long time. All right, Allie writes this, and thank you for that, John. I really appreciate your comments. All right, got a few more left here. Allie says this. Been a listener for a year now. I want to start by thanking you for taking the time to bring Star Wars joy to us all. I appreciate your constant positivity more than you know. Thank you, Allie. After listening to your Rise of Skywalker review, I felt relieved. I've been an active Reylo since TFA, and I love the ideas and positivity coming from that community. However, now I feel it has become somewhat hostile for those who enjoyed the Rise of Skywalker. I am sad that Ben passed. However, I feel like him passing into the Force was such an honor for his character. Yes, it would have been a fairy tale ending if he had survived. However, I find it hard to logically justify that decision. Ben Solo looked like the happiest he has ever been prior to his passing into the Force in the arms of the woman that he loves and who loves him. Yes. And no one's ever really gone. Ben Solo passing into the Force doesn't mean the end of Ben Solo. At the very least, he will be waiting for Rey once she passes into the Force herself. The whole concept of the Force dyad is so freaking cool. And I also bawled my eyes out during the Han and Ben scene. So many good emotional moments. Reylo and Bendemption hit all the right notes for me, and I feel sympathy for those who are so distraught about the ending. However, these feelings do not justify hating on people for liking how things ended. Listening to your review gave me hope in such a dark time for the Rise of Skywalker loving Reylos. I look forward to your future content. Once again, thank you so much for all you do, and Merry Christmas. May the Force be with you. Wow, thank you, Allie. That was great, and I agree with your sentiments. I really do. I appreciate it. All right, friend of the show, Mark, says this. Saw the Rise of Skywalker for the third time. Took the family. I have to say it gets better each time I see it. Totally agree. I think it slows down the second time. It doesn't seem as fast-paced. Yep. My guess since the first movie was Rey being a Palpatine. I base that off of her fighting style and lots of thrusts and lunges. I feel like this movie should have been about 15 to 20 minutes longer at least. Yeah, this is the first movie that I'm actually hoping we get a special edition for. It could have been a little fleshed out more. I love seeing Rey flying Luke's X-Wing. That was epic. Overall, I think it's a fitting conclusion. I can't wait to see the last Mando episode based on that and this last movie. I'm super excited to see where Star Wars goes. Love the show. Have both books in ebook and audio. Can't wait for the finale. I'm editing it right now. Hopefully it'll be out sometime late February, early March. And thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. All right. Patrick says this. I adored this movie, and I'm glad you loved it too. The movie was epic. And lastly, all right, Miranda's back with a lengthy one to close out the show this week before we get to my thoughts from my wife, Melinda. Miranda writes this. All right, it's taken some time to really come up with the best things to say on here right now that I've so far watched the film twice this week. Still not ready to talk about everything because there's so much I could say, so I won't be giving a full review from beginning to end. The truth is I don't know where to begin, and that's where I'm really struggling. So let me make this simple for myself today. I remember when you said Star Wars can be whatever it wants. It's true, it can be. The movie represented everything that every Star Wars movie had. The title crawl, the epic space battles, lightsaber duels, good versus evil, outstanding visuals. It had strange but magnificent creatures, even some familiar faces that made a brief cameo that I did not expect at all. It had a stellar musical score. The cinematography always stands out, especially The Mandalorians, right? But really, the best part of the film, let alone all of them, but especially this one, was it had characters that we've all grown to love and care about, and sometimes to a point where we can see ourselves relating to them and looking up to them as role models, or to become our own special imaginary friend that we never knew that we needed. That being said, I now understand why some of the more vocal critics, mainly in the fandom, came at the sequel trilogy as hard as they had from The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker. Other fandoms I've been involved with in the past, it's no different. There's nothing wrong with mourning for a character and expressing your disappointment for what ended up happening. There's nothing wrong with that. And in this final entry, of course, it hit pretty hard for a lot of us, including all of us who had fallen in love with Rey and Ben's dynamic and who Ben Solo is as a character and everything he's gone through. Of course it hurts. It's no different to everyone who had grown up who loved Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Leia because people cared about them and saw something in them that they gravitated to. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And that's what makes them so amazing. We are lucky to have extremely talented and gifted actors and actresses who put their hearts and souls into these characters and in a way to make them immortal. I'll always be grateful to that. And to everyone involved, filmmakers, directors, producers, writers, editors, and even George Lucas himself and Kathleen Kennedy. I believed all of them did the best that they could. Granted, I know there are things that happened that I do not agree with, and I wish were done better with execution and writing. It's not just with this film, but all of them. They are people and they make mistakes, right? And the worst we can do is show the worst sides of ourselves and go to extremes. I won't do that. I want to set an example and just hold on to what I still love about Star Wars. Amen to that. I'll always be honest about what I don't approve of. There is more to Star Wars than just the movies. There is so much more to look forward to, and there's a lot that many people can create on their own, and it would not be possible if Star Wars never existed. I never would be writing my stories if Star Wars didn't exist. It is up to you and up to us as fans that decide how they want to feel about Star Wars going forward. For me, Star Wars will always be an epic space fantasy fairy tale mixed with Shakespeare and Excalibur, mythology and Campbell's hero story, some theology, and about belonging, finding your destiny and family, and most important, family and love. Thank you, John, and a big thank you to George Lucas for everything and giving the world the best franchise in the world. By the way, Miranda is not me, even though we share a lot of the same sentiments. Thank you so much, Miranda. I appreciate it. That wraps up listener feedback for this week. So, here is a brief conversation that I had with my wife, Melinda, about the film to go and close out the show this week. Just want to remind everybody to go and pick up your copies of EMBARK on Amazon. If you or someone you know likes sci-fi, obviously you listen to the show, you watch the show. Why wouldn't you? If you haven't picked up the books already, you can get the ebook, audiobook, and paperback on Amazon. Just search for EMBARK and John Justice. Both EMBARK Book 1 and Treasure in Darkness Book 2 are currently available. And Book 3, The Vanishing War, is in its editing phase. If you follow me on Twitter at The My Nerd World or at John Jon Justice, same with Facebook, I actually have released the cover art for The Vanishing War. You can check out what the cover looks like ahead of the book's release sometime next year. So I will say goodbye for now. But again, as a bonus to the show, here's a conversation that I had with my wife, Melinda, and I hope that you enjoy it. We'll be back again after the new year. So next week, Positively Star Wars will continue as we look towards the future, the upcoming live-action TV shows, along with the 2022 movie that we should get more details on sometime in January. Thank you so much for checking the show out. Stick around for that conversation with my wife, Melinda, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye. Do you even remember, like, the first time you saw Star Wars in the movie theater?
I saw Empire Strikes Back in the movie theater. That was my first Star Wars experience.
When it was first released, or do you not remember seeing... So you didn't go see A New Hope in the theater the first time it came out?
Not that I remember. No.
So that was the first Star Wars movie you actually ever saw?
The first thing I remember about Star Wars is the ship going across on the big screen in the opening scene.
From The Empire Strikes Back?
Right.
Okay, so the opening shot of the Star Destroyer coming into view. Did that movie though? And we've never actually talked about this though, but did that movie? Like, how old were you at the time? Do you remember? So that would have been, you're a couple years younger than me, so you would have been like, what, 7 or 8 years old?
That sounds about right.
Did it have any kind of impact on you at all at the time when you saw it, other than just being a science fiction movie?
Well, yeah. I remember having a poster of Luke Skywalker in front of Yoda's little home, and Yoda's on his back. And that was in my bedroom, and it was laminated because my grandmother worked for a middle school, and she had access to the big lamination machine. So we always had our posters laminated real nice. And I had the biggest crush on Luke Skywalker.
It's funny because actually we still have that particular poster. It's not in as great a shape, but I remember that, for what it's worth, that particular poster was actually pretty rare, because I know you had a couple of Pepsi promotional posters from that same period, and it's artwork that I actually really enjoyed quite a bit. So you ended up seeing, I assume, Return of the Jedi in theaters after it came out too, right?
Yeah, but I don't remember it as well as I do Empire Strikes Back.
Okay. So this is, because we're heading to now our 5th showing of The Rise of Skywalker, and you certainly did not, I don't think you saw either The Force Awakens or The Last Jedi this many times in theaters. Usually for both those movies we did like back-to-back showings the weekend it opened, but then normally I would be going off by myself to go and watch them again, because I don't recall, I think you saw The Force Awakens a few times in theaters, and maybe The Last Jedi, but certainly not 5.
No, this is the first time I've seen a Star Wars movie this many times in such a short amount of time. I think I saw the first 2 of these last 3 times each, maybe 4, but I don't think a 4th time.
Now, you've told me several times, and obviously we're going to see it again, and you're looking forward to seeing it again, and you're a big Harry Potter fan, and a bit of background, apart from what I've given already in the show. You know, you worked at Disney, you're big into fairy tales, you're big into Disney, you always have been, you've always loved Star Wars, but to my hardcore fandom, you've been more of a casual fan. I would actually say that you're a bigger Harry Potter fan than you are of Star Wars. So, as sort of putting that out there as the groundwork, what is it about The Rise of Skywalker that you have really gravitated towards? Was it something about the first viewing? Was it something surprising? Why is it this one you seem to like more than The Force Awakens or The Last Jedi?
I think this one was like the bow on the present. It was the finality of it all, I guess. But I personally love backstories, and so I really liked getting to know the main characters better. I liked getting to know Finn, and I really liked getting to know Poe Dameron better. C-3PO has always been one of my favorite characters, so watching him get more screen time, I guess, and more interaction, and I think I really enjoyed that. I really liked watching Rey figure out who she is as a person. Not so much in like a girl power sense, but knowing what we know about her after the first time, you find out that who she is and her lineage. But then watching the second time, I really watched her closely and how she interacted with other people and how positive she was, or when she smiled when no one is looking, and that she just really wanted to be a good person. And there are just subtle moments when she is observing other people or other races and what they're doing, and she hasn't seen it before, and just it's like watching a child for the first time on Christmas morning when they really know that maybe Santa came or they have presents to open, and that there's a magic there, and to see that she is just a happy person and that she doesn't want to cause harm.
Now, we talked about this quite a bit before the movie came out, because I knew a bit of the spoilers, and you were familiar with them, but didn't pay that close of attention when I shared them with you. But you were always of the opinion that Kylo Ren needed to die. And I say Kylo Ren because I think we were talking it in terms of him being the bad guy. All that being said, you were also not a fan of Adam Driver, and yet in the conversations that we've had coming out of this movie, not only does it appear that you've become a fan of Adam Driver, you actually really like. Obviously, Ben dies, so we're far enough along. There's spoilers here, but you actually really appreciated how they handled that end story between Rey and between Ben to the point where, again, you didn't really like Adam Driver as an actor, and now you seem to have a newfound respect, and I would even dare say that you're a fan of Adam Driver now.
Yeah, I'm definitely a fan of Adam Driver's. I think with the Kylo Ren character, he reminded me, getting to this point in the movie toward the end, it reminded me of Harry Potter, and it reminded me of Katniss Everdeen, when those major characters who have to go through so many bad experiences to become who they are, and the choices that they make along the road. And that moment in a book or a movie where that character realizes, oh my gosh, I have to go and sacrifice myself to save whoever I hold dearest to my heart, or to just end a huge war, whatever it is. That moment when that character realizes, I have to sacrifice myself. And to see that look on Kylo Ren's face on the Death Star when, like around the time that Rey leaves, and he just knows what he has to do. And that's it. And it's like, he knew the moment that she left and his mom is dead, he, has that interaction with Han Solo, and just, he knows. And I think for an actor to be able to portray that on screen, that you can see it and you can almost like feel it just coming off the screen from that actor, I mean, that's an accomplishment, in my opinion, for an actor to pull that off. And I got that from him, just like I got it from Harry Potter, and I got it from Katniss Everdeen in those movies too.
Well, in the few minutes before we arrive, and what we'll do is we'll stop the recording, and then we'll have a few more thoughts when we come out of our fifth showing, in case there's something else that you want to mention. But you were never like big. You know me, I was big into Reylo, and we're a really good, in our marriage, we're a really good balancing act. I'm the hopeless romantic, and you balance me out on that front. And that's not a dig on you by any stretch of the imagination, but of the two of us, I'm the more sort of sappy emotional one, more so than you are, and you were never a big sort of Reylo shipper. But again, and not to put words in your mouth, but you enjoyed how that ended, including that kiss at the end, and I was actually very surprised that you liked that, because that seemed like something that normally you kind of would have been a bleh kind of deal. Not in a negative way, it's just your personality, and yet you actually thought they handled that really well, and you liked that. So I guess I want you to comment on that just briefly.
Yeah, I could do without the kiss. I don't know. I'd have to really think about it if they didn't have that kiss, and how would that be different. I think the kiss was just simple enough that it was in that moment. It was a vulnerability between those two characters, for both of them who don't really know a lot of love. That's not to say
that could have been the first time that either of them kissed ever.
I imagine it was so, unless we get like a little Kylo Ren running around that nobody knows about, because that's how Palpatine must have pulled that off, right? So I think for those two characters in that exact moment of, like, she doesn't know her parents, he knows his parents, but walked away from his parents, and they both were on two completely different paths. And when two people share such an intense I guess, life-altering, almost life-ending, when they have that kind of an experience with each other, then something changes, and in that moment you become bonded. So we know that they had bonded a little bit before that, with their Force connection moments, and to me that was all just a lot of angst between the two of them. So much emotion, whether it's positive, negative. I mean, they are just like at each other's throats, but because they're both very deep in what they feel, I think. So for that kiss, I think it was just a I guess another bow on the present. It was just something that the two of them shared when no one is looking, and they're completely vulnerable and almost, I don't want to say innocent because that's not the right word, but for them to share that was just, I don't know where it would have led, or if it should have led to anything, because sometimes things happen and you walk away and you're a changed person.
Well, and I'll add this, and then we'll wrap up this part of it. It's the difference between, in my view, it's the difference between what happened with Cassian Andor and Jyn Erso at the end of Rogue One. Those two are going down the elevator. The Death Star has fired on Scarif. They know that they're doomed. Mm-hmm. But in my view, they hadn't shared enough individual personal moments to warrant anything beyond sort of just them staring at each other with an emotional connection. Like if Cassian and Jyn had kissed in that moment, it would have been awkward and weird. Mm-hmm. They had gone through that experience together in Rogue One, but we hadn't really seen them deal with anything on any kind of intimate level. And I think that's the difference that makes the Kylo Ren and Rey kiss work, because of everything that had led up to that, and all the things that, if it hadn't been for what had happened in The Last Jedi and the connection that they made in that particular film, where they actually had a moment and Kylo told her that she wasn't alone, and even though he was still leaning towards the dark side, they had very intimate moments that led up to that made that work. And again, if Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor kissed at the end of Rogue One, I kind of would have been like, well, that seemed really thrown in or whatever. Just because they hadn't had that shared experience yet. But for Rey and Kylo, it absolutely works for me.
If she hadn't looked in his eyes and seen that he was Ben,
smiling and, yeah.
I mean, if she hadn't said Ben, like, to recognize that he had shed whoever that Kylo Ren persona was, or whatever, then I don't think it would have worked.
The Force will be with you. Always.
My nerd world.